And I just thought it would be a different change. We're going to move quickly and talk about these things. But you know, here locally, there's a lot of interest in producing food locally, producing food in your backyard, and this is the material you need to get to know, because unlike broccoli and the big beefsteak tomatoes and things, this doesn't need to be sprayed. Most of what we're talking about is so well suited here to where you live that none of it is a problem. So that's one of the main things I want to emphasize. Some of these vegetables, just like our rare fruits, every now and then it turns out to be some great product that we never knew about, and people are making $1 million off of it. And 2 years earlier, it was just some funny thing that people from Lapland ate or something. So it is kind of neat. So now, tropical vegetables covers, everybody has different definitions. Tropical vegetables doesn't, it's the tropics is a belt. It's not just hot places. And they go up as well as around the world. So you really pick different elevations for things. And today we're going to be talking about pretty much lowland, which is what we are, climate zones. So that's not to say that this Chinese cabbage couldn't be a tropical vegetable, but it would have to be 5,000 feet up. I mentioned pesticides, and this is 5,000 feet up. They're close to it in the Cameron Highlands. And when you see something this beautiful in a farm, there's probably been a massive amount of substance abuse there. Herbicides, fungicides, insecticides. Cabbage, of course, doesn't just cluster on the sides of mountains in mass without loopers and bugs and everything else. And I was taking this picture and I was admiring it so much, and then I got to thinking about why there wasn't a blade of grass or a bug or anything there except beautiful cabbage. And you don't have to worry about that in what you're doing. But this in Southeast Asia and really around the world, pesticide abuse is a big problem. And we noticed last time we were in Bangkok, there was a portable lab right in the market, and people were taking their vegetables over and having them assay. And if they found some that were really toxic, then they could try to track them down and stop it. So people are becoming aware of this. But the really neat thing about the tropics is the diversity. I mean, it's just massive. When we go in our grocery store, we have a pretty short section of green stuff, and it's much bigger now than it ever has been. But in 6 feet of Cambodian floor space here, you've got all of this stuff crowded in here, fresh, picked the same morning, and it's just a botany trip to go to the market in many countries around the world. I'd like to start talking about what we're going to do here with one that you're probably already growing. This is balsam pear, and if you have a fence in Florida, this one will grow on it sooner or later. This is probably one of the most widely used medicinal teas in the world, certainly in the tropics, I should say tropics. It's also eaten and it's also poisonous. Now, medicinal teas are not beverages. They're medicinal. They're tonics. And you can't automatically assume that you can drink a quart of any tea like this a day without really knowing what you're doing. But when you go to Kingston or Bangkok, they're going to tell you it's a kidney tonic, the tea. I don't know exactly what that means, but it's amazing how universally people feel that way about it. The leaves are what they use to make the tea. Children all over the world take these toxic orange little footballs about this big and pop those red gooey seeds in their mouth and spit the seeds out, and the little red part is sweet, and it's kids' candies on the streets in Jakarta or Mexico City or everywhere. It's pan-tropical. So if this weed comes up, crush it and smell it. It's very fragrant, or pretty funky, but it is an important one. Now that same plant has a cultivated form, and this is a very important Asian vegetable. As a matter of fact, there are 3 cultivars. This is bitter melon or bitter gourd. The cultivar on the left is always the Indian cultivar. And the other two are cultivated in other areas. We had a farmer a mile from here years ago. He grew 5 different kinds of bitter melon. He sent some to Filipino markets, and some to Indian markets, and some to Thai. They supplied him with the seed for their specific varieties they wanted. Closely related to that is this gack. And you know, I had never seen gack, and I don't think very many people in South Florida had when someone brought it to us in Vietnam, and I literally didn't know when we just picked it up whether it was some kind of passion fruit or it's a cucurbit, and it's related to the bitter melon very closely. And it's used...
We need a little bit of light to take notice.
Okay, can you put a little bit of dim light on? Being an ex-photographer, you know, I'm just thinking with the photos, but okay. So this is gack, and the names of these are on all of your lists. So the scientific name is written down there, except for horned African cucumber at 5 this morning. I couldn't remember what it was. I can't now either. But it's used to make rice red. And it's the orange goo around the seeds. They also, one of the common colloquial names is devil's guts. And it's a pretty good name. You know, you might ask why red rice is important. And I can't tell you. But I guess if you eat enough rice, it's festive, it's special. Well, what was interesting is 20 years ago in Vietnam, they started getting little cheap bottles of red food dye. And in some limited areas, they started using that instead of gack. And a year later, they found vitamin A deficiency appearing among children in certain areas, and they traced it back to lack of gack. Because it has 10 times more vitamin A than a carrot. That's a lot. That's why we eat carrots, and it has 10 times more. It has 70 times more lycopene than a tomato. One of the things I love about gardening, it's just a peripheral thing, is I don't want to say fraud, but is wonderful, creative marketing. And if you believe that that's true. But some of you all know about noni juice, and then mangosteen juice has come along, and now gack has come along, and you can buy bottles of red juice. And that's amazing because, like I say, 5 to 7 years ago, you couldn't find anybody in the country who knew about it. Even all my Vietnamese friends just looked at me. They had no idea because it was from North Vietnam. So, amazing travel for this thing. It's a rank grower. The vines are male or female, and through much of the year you can see big red gacks hanging up in our trees. Another cucurbit is the ivy gourd here. The leaves look like English ivy, and the leaves and stem tips are eaten as a little cooked vegetable. I guess you can eat them raw too. Normally the red parts here, most people don't eat the red ones, they're overripe. But when they're green, the younger and more tender the better, but they're sliced and eaten. Often in a overhead trellis. Many of these vining Asian vegetables are traditionally grown on top of trees and shrubs or trellises. Another one that actually, this was one David Fairchild was pushing back in the 40s. The chayote is a single-seeded perennial squash. There's a squash plant that you can plant and produce for 15 years. If you get real hungry, you can dig up the root and eat it. In the summer, days like today, the stem tips grow 6 to 8 inches each day. You can almost think you see them growing. And those tender tips are eaten as greens as well. This is the, 20 years ago, I brought this back to the Fruit and Spice Park from Central America because I wanted chayotes that wouldn't be stolen in people's pockets. You can hardly hold these things. They're like a sea urchin. Oddly enough, they're now the hot item in the ethnic markets around Florida because it's felt that it's a better quality chayote than the smooth ones that we've always grown here. So, now I never would have predicted that anybody would want to grow that, Well, another cucurbit, all of these plants are woven through people's lives and have been for centuries. This is Casa Banana from tropical America. And it is, my descriptions are the best I can do, and a lot of people that are dedicated fans may be offended, but I do my best. It tastes kind of like cantaloupe that's been floating around in water for 3 days. It's very, it makes a pleasant juice. But unlike cucumbers that have nice little seeds that you just swallow, and these are kind of woody seeds and you can't chew them and swallow them. So you have to juice it and strain it, and then you can make actually a pretty nice beverage. These little yellow things, these are hanging here like this for Easter. They decorate all over Guatemala with these, and those are cow udder fruits in between. Horned African cucumber is really, really an unusual plant. Somebody sent me 2 seeds from Africa 25 years ago, and we planted them in the park on a raised bed, and they sprouted and they started growing, and they made a mat of vegetation that hugged the ground and sealed off light. And it eventually ended up being a 35-foot circle from 2 little seeds. And then it started to fruit, and they were everywhere, and they're sharp and they hurt. They started, and I never planted them again because I was worried about whether they'd be invasive or not. Many years later, I got a call from Los Angeles. Somebody wanted to describe a kiwana. Well, I never heard of a kiwana, and apparently no one else had either because it was a made-up name, it turned out. It was really neat because I got to study the distribution system. I got calls from Los Angeles, Seattle, Dallas and Chicago, New York and Boston and Atlanta, and then it arrived here. They showed up in the grocery store, and each one was wrapped in a waxed paper, separately packed in Excelsior, with a 4-color brochure that folded out. And the recipes were wonderful. But they had one similarity. You would slice the fruit and take everything out, and then put something good in it and eat that. So, now my friends in Australia have this growing wild in their groves, and when they mow, it pulls on the vines, and these very hard, sharp-pointed things drop on them like bombs. And some of the guys wear hard hats and pads, you know. Kuwanis bouncing off their head. So it's not beloved. There's someone in this room, and I won't mention any names, who actually has grown and sold these commercially. This is snake gourd, and this is a real fun vegetable. You know, when you go to the big market in Kuala Lumpur, there are 3 cultures there. There's Indian culture, Malay culture, and Chinese culture. And there might be 500 grocers there, little stalls, but that's how they're segregated out. And each guy's got his own, they may look like they all have the same stuff, but each guy's got his own friends that come and support him. It's wonderful. It's a great social element. But when you see snake gourds laying there, it's an Indian stall. There's no other way. These can be 5 feet long. They often in India, when they're cultivating them on these trellises, they tie stones to the tip of the snake gourd as it grows so that it's straight, and they can bundle them up effectively when they're packing them. It tastes like, and you know, it does taste like this, but it tastes better than it. It tastes like peanut butter and asparagus. But believe me, it's good. The name snake gourd, if you look on the bottom there, when they hit the ground, they don't grow straight, and they actually coil like a snake. And I've jumped a number of times over the years from snake gourds. Everybody knows loofahs. I love going to Bloomingdale's and seeing a little piece of loofah bleached and sold for $12. Oddly enough, you can eat that fibery loofah when it's that big. And you slice it very finely, you know, you can eat it. The loofah on the right, the loofah on the left is the one we scrub with most often. That's loofah cylindrica. On the right is loofah actangulata, badly called Chinese okra. Now that's another very important Asian vegetable. You can go to any Chinese restaurant in town and not find it on the menu. This is American Chinese food. But if you go to the chef's house and look in his refrigerator, it'll probably be there. That also has a fibrous skeleton. And you know those things, they use them for scrubbers, but my favorite was I saw one where they were packing them up in a diesel oil filter. They couldn't get filters, so they were just stuffing them with loofahs. Bottom gourds are edible, and some are and some aren't. And the way you know is you try to eat it. And if you can't, then that was a not edible one. Like there's 4 gourds here. The one across the top is edible. The one on the center right is edible. The other 2 aren't. So, oddly enough, bottom gourd, not only for containers but for food, is also one of the most ancient of materials cultivated by human beings. There is what is shown here on the upper right corner with the leaf and the flowers is it does show cucurbit blossoms, male and female. The long stem is actually a male stalk. The shorter fat one is a female ovary miniature fruit, essentially. And the picture there is a trellis in front of the park right after we built it. And I am a parent, and I am required to embarrass my daughter whenever I can. So that's my daughter when she was cucuzzi-sized. Calabaza is grown locally here, and is a pumpkin that loves it here. And none of the rest do. So I don't think you can, in Dade County, grow a jack-o'-lantern pumpkin. I've never seen it. I don't know how far north you have to go, but it doesn't happen here. Calabaza, however, it might make a great jack-o'-lantern, but it does have a very good quality flesh. It is a good pumpkin. And when all the other pumpkins and squashes get eaten up with mildew and worms and everything else, calabazas are great. If you've got a vacant lot nearby, plant it there and just let it go. Set it free and let it grow up over the trees and bushes. It does need a lot of running space. And for the first 20 feet, it's all male flowers before the female flowers begin to appear as well. Winter melon is an important Chinese fruit. In Miami, it's mostly known as calabaza chino. That's how it's called in Cuba, Chinese pumpkin. It has a waxy cuticle, hence a long shelf life in the name winter melon, like winter squash. This is one of the most traditional banquet dishes in Chinese cuisine. The lid is cut out like a jack-o'-lantern, the seeds are gooped out, and a soup, all the ingredients of soup are put it back in, and the lid is put on, and it's hung in a sling and steamed for hours and hours and hours until it's soup. And it's served as its own tureen. And if it's a big event, that waxy cuticle is carved with all sorts of decorative designs. An entirely separate vegetable is entirely the same, and that's fuzzy gourd. This plant is harvested in two ways. Immature, it's very fuzzy, and it's used as an unripe melon then. This is also pickled like using watermelon rind to make pickles. It's not a good pumpkin. This is an illegal plant, and it doesn't alter your perceptions in any way, but it's illegal in Florida, although it's been widely distributed, and I bet I could probably in a weekend find 50 backyards growing it, but this is kangkong, or Ipomea aquatica, the water spinach, swamp spinach. It's got a lot of names. Kangkong is as good as any. This is a highly aquatic morning glory. And it blooms like all morning glories and sweet potatoes and things. And the reason it's illegal is because of this. Kangkong is one of the finest, most succulent, tender, delicious greens to cook in all of tropical Asia. And there are millions and millions of people eating it and loving it every day. And this lady still can't clear this little creek out. She's been, every day forever she can pick there. So this is something we don't need in our canals and in the Everglades and all that. So it is justifiably an illegal plant. This is probably on that list too, but it's so odd I like to talk about it. This is water mimosa. And on quiet pools and streams, this thing snakes across, on its own little flotation system, and quite nice. There it is in the market. Sometimes it's very hard to figure out from looking at something laying limp in the market what it really is. And most people in the market just know whatever the local name right there happens to be, so that doesn't help much. But that's water mimosa, and that stem is eaten. On the right of it is the Ipomea aquatica, the kangkong. Lotus is probably the most important flower in Asia, and I think probably, that's my favorite flower, it's so beautiful. But lotus symbolizes in Hindu and Buddhist mythology the enlightenment of a person. It comes up out of the mud and the muck and it blossoms in the heavens. And they're beautiful. The green seeds are edible. When you take it, peel it and take it cut the leaves off, the remainder tastes like an English garden pea, fresh green pea. But what it's really used for is these roots that you see in the upper right corner there. Lotus roots look like links of sausage. When you slice them, they look like, when I was a kid, we used to have wagon wheel pasta. Anyway, it's got holes in it for flotation and gas exchange and so forth in the mud where it lives. So you'll find these lotus roots in many, many, many Asian grocery stores around Miami. And the leaves as well, are great big leaves. They're used as plates, and they're also used to wrap food for certain things. Betel leaf is famous for really being the wrapping that you use for chewing betel nuts. Betel nuts are palms that have narcotic alkaloids that are, they chop up the seed and they sprinkle powdered lime on it to chemically activate the alkaloids, and then they wrap it all up in this leaf and suck on it, and it makes their saliva red. You know, eventually it eats the enamel off your teeth so they go black, and then eventually they go away. So millions and millions of people still chew beetles. This is katuk or sarapus, and this is an edible green. You'll find in so many backyards in tropical Asia. You just put a couple of little cuttings in and you get a nice little hedge, and you've got a long-lasting supply of greens. None of these things need to be sprayed or monkeyed with, and, you know. When you eat this leaf fresh, it tastes kind of like green peanuts. It's eaten both ways. This is talinum, and talinum is, and I tossed it in here to remind me to tell you, there are hundreds of edible leaves, and some of them are really good, and some of them are just edible leaves. Some of them are slimy, and so, you know, and a lot of it, you know, if you're, well, it's like if you had never had collards, and somebody ran up to you and say, well, you got to try eating these, you probably wouldn't come out really well with them the first time you tried to eat them. And, you know, if you just boil them and eat them, they're not going to be any good unless you put butter, bacon, whatever you put in them. So this is an example of that to me. It's a little leaf it's a weed. You can grow it in your yard. It doesn't take up much space. It doesn't ask for anything. But, and it is something you can add to other things. You can add to salads. I don't know anybody that likes to eat a big bowl of them, but it's a good extender, you know, to add different textures and flavors to salads. We used to call this tampala years ago in Florida, but this is an amaranth. Chinese spinach is the name. You know, the English named anything from the Orient Chinese. They didn't discriminate very much. So these tender leaves are eaten, but with many of these plants, and this is a good example, yes, the leaf is edible, but that doesn't mean any leaf on the plant any time in its lifespan. Amaranth leaves are eaten when they are young and tender, and usually when the plants are very small. So you can't grow this up and have it look pretty in your yard and then eat it, because you're not going to like it then. The leaves tend to be tough and bitter then. And this is true with chrysanthemum for chrysanthemum tea and all kinds of things like that. So the seed packet never tells you that, you know, from the companies. But Nopalito is absolutely effortless here. It's hard not to grow it once you have it. When you go to the grocery store in the Mexican section, there's always bottles of Nopalitos, and nopal cactus is what it comes from. And since you eat the tender young ones, they're nopalitos, and they're a little bit like okra and green beans or something mixed with it. And all of these are new foods, and if you haven't had them before, they're not going to immediately be the favorite thing you've ever eaten. If new foods take sometimes more than one try, tasting them tentatively and knowing what's coming helps the next time. So don't give up on something if you shove it in your mouth and you're just not delighted immediately. If you've never seen a cucumber in your life and somebody ran up to you and said, boy, you got to try this, what would you do with it? Would you really be very excited about it? But yet, there is a place in your life for cucumber. This is a piper species related to black pepper and the other one we just saw. And this is, we discover things at the park all the time. We've had this for 20 years. And it was originally distributed at Fairchild Gardens as a species. They didn't know what it was. We still don't know what it is. And it was in the nursery, and I noticed every time I took Southeast Asian visitors through my nursery, they stuffed all these leaves in their mouth, you know, and I tried it, and it tastes like black pepper on a leaf. It's really very interesting. You don't want to do too many leaves at once, but it's very useful. And again, it asks for nothing. You plant it in your yard and put it in with your other plantings. You know the way Mrs. Blanco's front yard was the other day? You can grow a lot of these perennial vegetables just like that. And it can be very, very attractive. This one is a nutritional superstar. And it's got claims that I hope are true, but, you know, things aren't usually that good. In Mexico, there are many areas, and there are little pamphlets on this, of Mayan spinach, chaya, curing cancer. Well, what it is well, it has to be cooked or it's actually toxic. It's parboiled. You cook it, dump the water, cook it a little more. And it is a treasure house of vitamins and minerals. And in diets where these are not as common as they might be, this is a real surge of nutrition for people, a real tonic for them. So it has a reputation for being a real nutritional powerhouse, and it is. It grows from cuttings. The cultivated forms seldom make seed. The wild forms in the jungle, you can't get within 8 feet of them without scratching them. They've got just fuzz and fur and nettles sticking off of them in every direction. But they've been cultivated since long before the Mayans, I'm sure. And there are many different forms of cultivated plants there like this. They're toxic. Things don't eat this. However, the flowers are very, very good butterfly attractors. So that's another advantage. You put a cutting in your yard like a tent stake and walk away. That's all you have to do. It'll grow. So, and the leaves are there. You eat the tender new leaves. They're always there when you're ready. So this is one of the odd ones. This is what we call a potter. This is just something that you're getting ready to do dinner, and you just walking by and grab a couple and throw them in with everything else. Winged tree vine is a cissus. It's sold as an ornamental to cactus and succulent guys, and it turns up from time to time. But it's just one of an endless number of edible things that you can grow in your yard. Susumber is a solanum, Solanum torlum, and it is used like a pea or an eggplant. When it's just before it turns yellow, these are a little past. It's sautéed or mixed in with other stir fries. This is a solanum that is resistant to nematodes, which is nice. Yard-long bean is actually a black-eyed pea in disguise. The pod gets 18 inches long, and you can shell out the beans and eat them as beans, or you can, if you get it tender, eat it like a giant green bean. Pigeon peas, gandoles. These are a perennial, but really they only fruit well for us the first year or two anyway. So the books may say they last 5 years, but not here. But it is an effortless tree to grow, but there's an awful lot of pea picking involved to get a cup of them. That's why it's not everywhere. But it is worth considering. Bamboo shoots, we all know what those are. They are important. I find most people pick bamboo shoots when they're already becoming trees instead of shoots. You've got to get them really down low when they're tender. This is papaya, and papaya, we tend to think of this as a wonderful fresh fruit. Well, it is. But equally important, it's a green vegetable, raw or cooked. And Thai coleslaw is a tradition. One of the worst days of my life was involved with Thai coleslaw. For years at our Asian festival, I managed to be a judge on the Pad Thai noodle contest. Well, they got tired after a few years of that and said, let's do Thai coleslaw next year. I said, wonderful, let's do that. Well, I didn't know what it was. So there were 8 contestants, and all of a sudden I was the only judge. There were 1,000 people out there, and there were little colorful plates of green stuff and red stuff. Well, it turned out to be hot. I could go halfway. Well, I put it in my mouth. Searing pain shot through my face and up to the top of my skull. And within seconds, I lost all the feeling in my mouth. I didn't know if it was open, closed, chewing, or drooling. Tears are running down my eyes, and all the Thai ladies are going, ah. And that was number one. So we don't do that contest anymore at all. And
Chris?
yes.
What about papain? I thought you weren't.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's a good point. Well, to go further into papayas, there's a sap in papayas that is that digests protein, like the pepsin in your stomach. It's papain, and it is it digests meat, and it's the main ingredient in adults meat tenderizer. I always love marketing with cosmetics because they sell little wads of mud for big bucks, you know, but wonderful bottles. And the exfoliators always attract me, and they'll say, botanical, okay, well, you know, ADOS meat tenderizer. But when you handle green papayas, you're giving your hands a beauty treatment, because when you're done, you have beautiful baby pink hands, because all the old skin's been digested off by the papaya. There's a great dish for coleslaw called, well, it's just papaya coleslaw, but you not the Thai kind. You make it with green strips of papaya and then chop it up. And you treat it just like coleslaw, except instead of mayonnaise, you use a substance in the grocery store that's kind of a mystery. It's a mayonnaise bottle with white stuff in it, and it says salad dressing. But it doesn't have eggs in it, evidently. And you use that instead of mayonnaise, because if you use mayonnaise, the papaya actually starts eating it. And it doesn't work out. The mayonnaise disintegrates and it doesn't taste good at all. But if you use salad dressing, that salad dressing, green papaya makes a coleslaw that you can't tell from regular coleslaw very much. And you know, if you've got a papaya tree, you all know you've got a lot of them out there, so you've got ones to spare. Okra is a tropical vegetable, and I just tossed it in here to show you that we tend to think of the little ones in our grocery store, whatever it looks like there is what it is. But around the world, these things differ a lot. And here's a large red okra and African okra, which is also large. And they're just different shapes of okra. Musk okra isn't really okra, but it's a relative. And this is also a spice called amberette. And it's like an okra pod with some really irritating hairs on it, like okra has, but worse. So they have to be cooked to be eaten. And don't stick a pod in your pocket. Roselle is a hibiscus, and it is a perennial, no, it's an annual hibiscus. You plant it, you have to plant it after the 15th of March, or it will flower and die during the winter the moment you plant it. But when the days get long enough, it will grow all summer long, and in the fall, when the days get shorter, it will flower and produce these seed pods. And that wrapping around the seed pod, you peel those things off and boil them down in water, and you make a sauce that's very much like cranberry sauce. Or you can make a drink. They sell beverages all over the world, actually, red, punchy-looking vegetables made out of roselle. That was once a very common plant in Florida. Red roselle is an edible leaf relative of it. Tomatoes, you all know tomatoes, but there are some tomatoes that are effortless here. The yellow pears are pretty good. The little Everglades tomato we always have at the park is excellent. And beyond that, you're probably going to get into trouble. The cow's udder, for obvious reasons there, is poisonous, but people start talking about it and get confused. It is poisonous. Sometimes used in folk medicine like a lot of poisonous things, so stay away from it. The naranjilla and cocona are high altitude tomato relatives, and they're very nice. You can't grow them here. The guys over at Trek grew some for an experiment they ran in an air-conditioned greenhouse. Husk tomato. This is actually a wild native here, but it grows in different forms of many parts of the world. In Hawaii, it has the poa berry, which is a husk tomato of some sort. It's essentially a tomato-like berry that's got a spicy, tangy taste in a little paper lantern. And when the lantern turns brown and papery, that's when it's done, if you're going to use it fully ripe. Salsa has the tomatillo, you know, the big green thing with the paper stretched way over it. That's used green. Eggplants aren't always big square. You know, the rest of the world laughs at our big blocky eggplants. These eggplants are more tender and really a lot better. I'm not going to go too much on the eggplants, except for one of my mentors. Maybe this explains a lot. But this is Lyman Hardy, and Lyman was a Renaissance man and a free thinker. And he took instead of planting a 60-foot row of eggplant, he top-worked a Solanum macranthenum tree, which is a compatible rootstock. Nematodes eat up eggplants. That's their main problem. And he grafted his whole row. He had 60 eggplant plants on this big tree. And they fruited, grew. You know. The tree itself is not edible. But nothing gets people more aroused in the vegetable world than chili peppers. Everybody likes to take sensuous pictures of them. There are many, many different kinds, and it's hard to imagine when chili peppers were just restricted to Central and South America. The rest of the world didn't have them, but plants are always been important to human lives. And the whole age of exploration is really based on food and plants. And the first thing they did was carry whatever they could to the next country. And chilies very early went at it, the New World, and were spread quickly. They make very good landscape plants when you get a perennial variety. Breadfruits don't grow in everybody's backyard here. Certainly they do on the Keys if you want them. For effort and pounds per square foot of carbohydrates, boy, a breadfruit is a pretty good bet. And the National Breadfruit Institute, you've got a little flyer about, is really promoting this as a source for hunger relief in moist tropical areas where, you know, we do have monsoon rains and you can't really grow a good garden, but breadfruits grow and they don't have bug problems and life is good and you just use it. Well, that's just rice. Some people have never seen rice. Anybody know what that grain is?
Bamboo.
Bamboo, that's right. That's flowering bamboo, which produces an edible seed. It just doesn't do it very often, every 20, 40, 60, 80 years. Well, these are just fern fiddleheads. Some of them are good, and some of them are carcinogenic. We have actually a good one here in the Everglades called leather fern, but you can't let the fiddlehead get any bigger than about 4 inches. And it's very nice. Wing bean was a superstar 20 years ago when the rest of the world discovered it. They've been growing in Southeast Asia, of course, for thousands of years, but it was discovered in the late 60s by the Western world. Wing bean is a perennial bean, although it's really best treated as an annual. The flowers taste like a raw mushroom. The roots are edible, but then you kill the plant. But the best part is the bean pods. You have to grow them and pick them when they're tender. We tried to get our pole bean farmers here to grow them. And they grew some, but they refused to pick them until they were this long and like little pieces of wood, so they didn't do it ever again. But it's a good backyard plant for you. Sugar cane, you know, you don't have to buy it out of a bag. You can, if you're making drinks that you think need sugar, you can just cut strips of sugar cane and drop it in and, you know, let the kids play with it. The pit in the right is something I'd like to find something like that in the country. That's edible sugar cane pollen, and it's cultivated for that in New Guinea and some other places. Edible flowers have been a hot thing in the last few years. We don't have time to do it. We've already talked about those and those. Horseradish tree is an interesting tree because you can eat the leaves, you can eat the flowers, it doesn't eat bugs, it grows from cuttings, it grows from seeds. As long as it doesn't go under water for a long time, it's fine. And leaves, flowers are edible. These long pods that form on the tree are called drumsticks, and they sell for, usually farms get about 75 cents a piece for them. They're a very popular vegetable, and there they are in the market. Hummingbirds, Sesbania grandiflora. David Fairchild mentioned this in his books. It's the largest pea flower in the world. As if that isn't enough, you can also eat it. You can eat the leaves, you can eat the tender pods. But it's got a lot more value than that. It's one of the fastest growing small trees in the world. The first one I got, somebody gave it to me in a pot. It was a 1 gallon pot about this big. A year later, it was 14, 15 feet tall. They're using it for rapidly recycling trees for paper pulp. Torch ginger, I didn't realize this, and you know, it's funny, I looked at them in Borneo for years in the markets, and I never knew what I was looking at. Nobody there could tell me so that I could understand. But not only is it a wonderful flower, but these are the flower sheaths of torch ginger, and it's a very common traditional vegetable in Malaysia and Indonesia. Sweet potatoes, you all know what they are, but these are not yams, they're sweet potatoes. Yams are only a mistake we make in parts of the United States. Sweet potatoes are always sweet potatoes, and yams are something you're going to see later. Jicama is a Mexican root, crisp and crunchy like a giant water chestnut. And in Southeast Asia, although it's originally Mexican, they grow them everywhere. In Southeast Asia, it's not uncommon to see people peeling them and eating them like apples. Taro roots are an elephant ear-like plant, a very important plant in Hawaii for poi, and really all over the world. It's more important in the Pacific and Asia, and the cocoa yam, Xanthosoma, is more important in the Caribbean, but they overlap a lot. Taro stems are common in the market. These are aroids. They must be cooked or they will really burn your mouth, like biting into a Dieffenbachia. But they are cooked and they're excellent vegetables. Giant taro. You ever watch that show where you get left on the island? Well, right before you eat your tennis shoes, it would be giant taro's turn. But it is edible. Malanga is a crop here and was a big crop here, but most of it's moved into the Caribbean now. Back in the early 60s, people would drive down Chrome Avenue and say, oh, look at those crazy Cubans growing that stuff. Well, those guys all got rich, and now they have farms in Central America and Jamaica, and they import. But this is another aroid tuber, must be cooked. Very important vegetable in Cuban culture and many tropical American and African cultures. Amorphophallus is a botanical oddity to most of us, but it is food in some parts of the world. Some of the many varieties are used for edible food. Also an aroid, the big tuberous root that gets quite large has to be peeled and cooked. It has been grown locally here as a crop, and it just didn't grow well enough, fast enough to make it work out. I've always studied most Indian vegetables, and I know this is a terrible thing to say, but it's true, behind motels. When my daughter was young, we had to look for HBO in the pool. She's gone now, so my wife has to endure me looking for vegetable patches as we're going past motels, you know, because there happen to be a lot of people in the hospitality industry from Pakistan or India, and this is a fact. You can prove these. But they grow some wonderful vegetable gardens out the back door, and many of them here in Homestead have had gardens that I've helped with or found and they've helped me with. Yucca or cassava, another very important root crop. Very edible, very important, very poisonous, you die. There are two kinds. The kind you want to eat is the very nutritious, very healthy, good one. The bad one is actually used to eat only after it's been processed and rinsed and industrially formed to make little pellets called tapioca. But all over Miami, you'll find yucca in every Cuban restaurant, grown from cuttings. This is the yam, and this is a real wonder plant. We're just about done here. This will be the last one, I think. What time? What's the schedule? Anybody have a schedule? When are we breaking?
We're 13 minutes over.
Oh, I'm stopped. All right, this is it then. I'm sorry. Okay, yam is also has to be cooked. You can't eat it raw. It's one of the most nutritious fine-grained starches you can find, and it requires nothing. If we did not have yams, we'd have massive famine tomorrow in Africa, in parts of New Guinea, in many parts of the world. Yams are very, very important. Okay, they are, my first experience, just to give you an idea of why, somebody gave me an aerial tuber like this. The air potato, in spite of what you read, don't eat it. Some of them are poisonous, and some of them aren't, and the way you know is you eat one and you die. So certain areas, they are eaten, and they're good, but if you just walk around Miami, you don't know what it is, really. But somebody gave me a little tuber from an edible one, and I don't want a yam, So I'd never grown it. I didn't know anything about it, so I dropped it on my fence and I planted it. Well, it sprouted, grew to the top of my fence, and then it grew 40 feet each way down my fence. Fortunately, I have a big fence. But then, after about 4 months, the ground began to crack, and this huge thing lifted out of the ground. And it was a 35-pound tuber. And it had a thin skin, and the rest of it was digestible good starch. Now, in Africa, where they don't have water, they don't have fertilizer, this is great. This is important. They can wrestle one of these out of the ground and throw it in the shade somewhere and keep it for 6 months without any more effort than that. And it's always there, and it's important calories. So yams are life and death. Okay, well, we're going to stop with this. I'm sorry I ran over, but we allowed for a little extra flow time. So we're going to take a break now. It is 1:15, so at 1:30, we'll start up with the next one.